Hi, everybody. Welcome to the ASA podcast, where we focus on subcontractors, the construction industry, and ASA, and introduce you to people who are impacting the industry. The ASA podcast is brought to you by the American Subcontractors Association and the foundation of the American Subcontractors Association. My name is Mike Klein, and I'm your host. Today, my guest is Mike Oscar. He's the Director of Government Relations at ASA. Mike is going to be talking with us about ASA's advocacy efforts, including where we're seeing success, how it affects the members, and how they impact the industry. So welcome, Mike. I know you are pretty well known among ASA members, but why don't you introduce yourself and give us a little background on how you came to ASA and supporting subcontractors?
Thank you. Thanks, Mike Klein, and thank you everyone for listening and taking this time as we kind of dive into a little bit of my background, as well as the work that we do on your behalf at the national level for government relations at ASA. I have come to ASA. I've been actually working with you now for over 5 years, and I take it very seriously. It's not just me. I'm part of a team. I have my wife, Shannon, who runs the Attorneys Council, as well as Legal Defense Fund, and also works on contract documents. And then another person, a part of our team, is Kate Schramm. Kate joined us about a year and a half ago. She helps me prepare. Most recently, we had our fly-in in June, and we had 21 Senate meetings, 23 House meetings in one day for a total of 44 meetings. She's the one working behind the scenes, getting those meetings organized with me, and also helping me get out the information that I receive, whether it be a briefing, a memo, and help, as well as we work together, all three of us, to better assist the Government Relations Committee. But to really hone in on your question of why I got into this work, I used to work for Senator Arlen Specter, former senator from Pennsylvania. He has passed now, but it was a privilege to work with him, and my portfolio in working with him covered transportation, labor, and agriculture. On the labor side, and that's what happens, and this is where it gets a little tricky, because when we say labor, it kind of, it assumes it just covers construction, but that's not the case, and it also gives the connotation that this is a union, non-union issue, and it really isn't. And I'll delve into this a little bit more, but when you're trying to find the appropriate staffer, oftentimes you have to, with our issues, that is, as subcontractors, you often reach out to the labor staffer, but we're not all labor issues, because we do work with Department of Labor on OSHA, workforce development, as well as overtime rules and independent contractor rules. So there is a labor component to it, but we're also small businesses, and we represent small businesses. So having worked that portfolio for the senator, and when I left him in 2010, I went out into private practice, if you will, working on construction-related issues, worked with the finishing industry, and then having worked with the finishing industry, came upon the work, and that's FCA International, then came upon working with the American Subcontractors Association. So I've been doing this now for 14 years. I love it. And the main reason I love it, and I'm being very frank with you, as my old boss used to say, don't get a lot of true stories out of Washington, but this is a true story. I love it because our issues are non-ideological. We're not, for or against, where it's going to be above the fold in newspaper of an issue, but it is an issue that's going to be important for us to have prompt payment for our contractors. There are contractual issues involved here. There are labor issues involved here. There's workforce development issues involved, as well as small businesses, tax reform issues. So it's that all-encompassing portfolio that's very energizing, and it's one of the reasons that I enjoy doing the work, and it keeps me on my toes, and so our team's committed to that and committed to that mission.
Thanks. Yeah, it's I've been involved in the trades industry for a while as well, and it's very it's a industry that needs support, and I'm glad that you've chosen to focus on it. I think it's very helpful. So with that, I have a bunch of questions here. I am probably going to jump around a little bit because I think you answered some stuff in your intro there. So I'm going to jump down the page here and I'm going to ask you specifically. So what is it that ASA's government relations team does, and why is
Sure.
that so important to ASA members?
Well, it's an important committee for a variety of reasons. When I came on board, the committee was a small committee, not a very large, robust committee at the time, and we are now over 96 members. It also was lopsided. No disrespect to our legal partners. Our attorneys' council is very active. They have a very specific mission, but a lot of the members of our attorneys' council were also members of the government relations committee. And we didn't have a lot of subcontractors on that committee. And we represent the subcontractors. And it was imperative for us, if we were going to be vital to the committee and also to the board, advising the board on certain government relation matters, it was important for us to have the voices of subcontractors included in that committee. So we worked very hard. We actually have co-chairs. We have a male and a female, which is great. We have Gloria Hale from California, Glazer, and we have Courtney Little, who is our past president of ASA board, along with being a subcontractor in Arkansas, as well as a member of the Attorneys Council. So we have great leadership at on the committee. And then I was tasked last year, again, because we're still growing, to put together bylaws for the committee, which we've done. They were approved not only by the committee, but by the board and by the overall membership. And then beyond just picking what the committee in terms of the issues, picking the issues that we're going to debate, whether we're for or against something, we also have oversight of our political action committee. And we have I inherited a very healthy PAC fund. But I will say that I don't believe in leading with the PAC. I don't believe in leading with a contribution. I do not practice pay to play. What I practice is working on the issue. And so we've given some contributions, but a very minimal amount. And we established rules of engagement for that. Like, for example, if I was to say, hypothetically, Mike Klein, we were going to endorse you, well, I go to the committee and I put a memorandum together and I say, what is the background on Mike Klein? What is the justification for this contribution? And then I make a recommendation. And then it's given to a committee of 9 people, almost like the Supreme Court, so we don't have an even outcome. Most times we have a unanimous outcome. But if there's an objection, we give the 9 ballots out to those members on the PAC committee, and it's made up of the board, the general membership, the Attorneys Council, and the Government Relations Committee, and they make those decisions. So it's a very transparent prospect, and we are very bipartisan. Again, as I mentioned, our issues are non-ideological, so we don't really necessarily get in those squabbles of whether it's a Republican issue or a Democratic issue. So that's what the role of the committee does. And then the other main functionality of the committee is we meet in person twice a year, as well in person, and then we meet twice virtually. So we have 4 meetings throughout the year. And then we work very hard to establish our agenda. Usually it's done in a biannual way because Congress is every 2 years. So we set our priorities, like we're going to set up our priorities for the next Congress, which will be the 119th Congress in January. And we'll identify what are our key issues in no particular order for ASA in terms of our agenda. And then we work those issues for the next 2 years. We add and subtract issues sometimes. And again, the committee meets that. We're very fluid. Because you never know what's moving at that time, and you have to figure out how to move the initiative when a larger initiative is coming to a vote or consideration in committee. But then to step back for a minute, the main functionality for the committee is what I mentioned earlier, which Kate and I worked on very hard in terms of our recent fly-in. Because we're meeting with members of Congress constantly, but when we have our members come in, we had over 30 ASA members come throughout the entire country, come into DC, and we want to make that productive, and the committee is responsible for that. So that's it's kind of a nutshell of what we do. As part of that committee, though, we also bifurcate into the Attorney's Council as well as the contract documents, because what's ever happening in the Attorney's Council with our legal defense fund, or issues that they're contending with, or anything that we're dealing with the updates to consensus docs or AIA documents or contract documents. For example, in COVID, we talked about the force majeure, all of that, the portion of a contract that then is brought back into the Government Relations Committee. And then the final piece is we advise. We're not. I can practice the lobbying in Pennsylvania because I'm registered there. I am a Pennsylvanian, as well as working in Washington, D.C. But the other 49 states, I'm not. I do not have. I'm not registered. But we can advise, and we have done that. We've worked with other chapters in Colorado, Washington State, Arkansas, Pennsylvania, Florida, Louisiana, Alabama on retainage issues, prompt payment issues, mechanics lien issues, anti-indemnification. So we advise them, and we get them kind of, I like to use the farm analogy. We get them to the farm gate, but once it leaves the farm gate, then it's up to that state chapter to take it further and get it done. And we've been very successful in that regard.
So, and we'll get to some of those chapter things later, because I think it'll be important for especially the chapters to understand how this affects them and how they can engage. But you did mention prompt pay before and retainage. What are the most important issues, or what have historically been the most important issues and that are being addressed on Capitol Hill? And how do you set those priorities? You mentioned for the coming Congress.
Yeah. Well, I advise the co-chairs of what some ideas that I may have, so it's not just a blank slate to go to the group and say what's on your mind. I give a couple of bullet points. I've also done some of the research looking at what we fought on before, and then I take an analysis of what I think we can get accomplished based upon how the House and Senate are made up, whether it's going to be all Republican, all Democrat, who our administration is. I've never had a problem working with either side of the aisle. Again, even beyond my work with Arlen Specter, I've worked for Democrats, I've worked for Republicans. So I've never really been bothered about the partisanship. What I've been bothered by is just the lack of not getting things done. if we're going to do this, let's get the job done, right? So in this particular Congress, though, we had two critical bills that we knew legislatively we're going to move forward. And that is every year Congress does a National Defense Authorization Act. And that is the one piece of legislation Congress will get done, maybe not always on time, but usually done in that year. And that is to fund our armed services. And they've been doing that for well over 60 years. In that bill, and again, this goes back to staff, having meetings with staff, because you're meeting with the defense staffer. Even the defense staffers, because I've had this happen with some of our subcontractor members, the defense staffers will say, well, why are you meeting with me? Shouldn't you be meeting with this small business guy? Or shouldn't I be meeting with the infrastructure gal? Well, no, not necessarily, because in that bill, the National Defense Authorization Bill has a procurement code. And there's a lot of procurement-related issues that are fundamental to subcontractors in the construction industry for a lot of work that's being done at the federal level in our armed forces, whether it be Air Force, Navy, Department of Defense, Pentagon, the Army. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in our discussion of our recent work we've done on behalf of the Air Force with one of our subcontractors. In addition, the other bill that was coming up, that we had two infrastructure bills. We had a tremendous infrastructure bill that came right out at the beginning of this administration. President Biden signed early on to allow for over $1 trillion in America's infrastructure. And in that piece of legislation, when it was moving, we worked with the bonding producers. We also worked with the bonding companies to ensure that projects that were considered public-private partnerships, that they call them P3 projects, that any transportation infrastructure project minus water projects, and I say water, so you can hear my Philly accent. I don't spell it W-A-T-E-R.
I wasn't going to call that out on you, but
Yeah.
I
I don't spell it W-A-T-E-R. It's actually W-O-O-D-E-R, water. But the water aspects of that wasn't covered. But basically, under the Miller Act, any project that's $150,000 or more at the federal level has bonding protections for payment performance bonds. okay? Now, if you have a public-private partnership, which a lot of projects are in infrastructure, because, you know, as much as money we think we're spending in the federal budget, not all of that money is going to infrastructure. And so you have an outside source, usually a private investor, whether it be a country or an investor or a company, whatever it might be. And if the agreement, that's above my pay grade, how that agreement comes down. But if that agreement comes forward and there's a private aspect to that public project, private-public partnership, if you will, they don't have the protections for payment and performance bonds. The Miller Act doesn't apply to the private side. So we made sure in that legislation, it was a huge victory. 98 senators voted in agreement. You don't hear a lot of that where they come into agreement. They voted. We worked very hard on that to make that happen. And that's included in that $1 trillion package. And that's a big win for our subs. However, and now every 2 years, they do what they call water reauthorization. That goes to Army Corps projects, locks and dams, you know, it's very, very specific water-related project. It might even contain some wastewater projects. And there's no protections there for public-private partnerships. Now, we did not get it done this time because they passed what they call a clean bill, which means since it's every 2 years, rather than have any controversy, and because the Army Corps is notoriously backed up in getting projects funded on time and have funding, they had to move forward to the 2-year bill passing. So what they did was they passed a clean bill and they accepted no amendments. And one of our amendments would allow for this bonding. So we're going to work again. We have bipartisan support, Democrat and Republicans on the committee. We have a commitment from the ranking member and chair so that when the bill comes up again, we can do it again. But again, if they decide, leadership decides, you know, that's why elections have consequences depending on who's in charge. They decided that they were not going to allow amendments this time on the bill. So that one we will continue to push. But the saving grace is we have a large portion of infrastructure projects out of that $1 trillion package that are going to be covered with payment and performance bonds. And in that defense bill, and I'll be writing about it. If you don't read the ASA today, I highly encourage you to do so. I know we put it out in all of our different publications and media platforms, but I will be writing up very shortly about all the amendments that were related to procurement. And believe it or not all the procurement-related measures that are in that National Defense Authorization Bill that I was speaking about before are beneficial to subcontractors. There's a lot of rules and regulations that some of our subcontractors necessarily aren't favorable to. So but we have those that we are for, we have those that we're against, but we've been very effective in addressing prompt payment, PFAS implications there, as well as access to bases, as well as wastewater concerns, and the list goes on and on.
So I wanted to ask you, it occurred to me when we're out there doing this as ASA, are there partners with us? You mentioned the surety bond folks. And so are there other partners like them on a lot of this, or are we ever standing out there by ourselves advocating, screaming into the wind as what might be?
Well, I know, you know, oftentimes you hear it takes a village to get things done, and that is true. You have to build coalitions because it's very difficult to go in anything alone. And if you think that's the case, then candidly, you may not understand how it works in the Beltway. You've got to make a lot of friends. You got to have a lot of alliances. And as I've always taught in working in this industry is you need to know when to push and pull. You need to know when, if a staffer is going to be with you or against you. And that's why you have to lay the groundwork and meet with a lot of staff, meet with a lot of agency folks, and you have to be front and center because those relationships matter. Now, getting to the heart of your question, yes, we do work with a lot of different groups. One of the main groups we work with is the Construction Industry Procurement Coalition. It's about 17 to 22 groups roughly, where, for example, the AGC and the ASA and the sheet metal work contractors, FCA, the finishing contractors, along with the surveyor maps and surveyors and architects and engineers, we all come together and we decide. The ABC, for example, we all decide that, you know, we all have issues that are important to us, but where are issues that we agree on that we can work together to push forward? And one of the greatest examples of that is our continued efforts on prompt payment reform, which is very mutually beneficial, not only to the subcontractor, but to the general contractor, the prime, as well as all the, you know, first and second tier subs and all the architects, engineers, the whole tapestry of who's making up that that construction project. And because payment is key, and how quickly we get that payment is very, very, very important. So we work together in a bipartisan way, and we've been very effective in not only getting our message across the board on some of these items, but also working to ensure that Congress started about 2 Congresses ago, but what we call the Construction Procurement Caucus. And it's a congressional caucus because not all of our issues will be addressed by the Small Business Committee or the Armed Services Committee. Sometimes some of our issues are very specific to construction. They don't fall necessarily in a committee, but the topic is still relevant, needs to be addressed, and that's where you can use the congressional caucus to allow that forum to basically put sunlight on an issue that people may not otherwise be aware of. And then from that discussion, then it has a trickle effect or trickle down effect on other issues that might be relevant in the other committees. So it's a great educational vehicle. We also work on the construction industry safety coalition, which is based all on the safety guidelines right now. They just came out last week. In addition, the president just gave a presentation on the heat. You know, we have a major hurricane coming into Houston right now, I believe, with tornadoes. Hurricane 1, I heard earlier this morning about 4:30. It is currently in Washington, D.C., 99 degrees with a humidity of over 100%. So it really is not only hot, but is extremely humid. And so what's the bearing on that? And that goes back to what DOL came back with through OSHA, heat exposure. You know, again, I don't think you'll ever have a subcontractor say I'm against heat exposure or what the impact that will be. But I want to see the regs, and I want to see what I'm held accountable for in terms of my workforce. So we've got to get ahead of that to inform them, and especially if a new rule comes out. And when I say rule, there's, you know, proposed rules, there's final rules, you know, there's, you know, rule is not just, you know, a finite word. It's got a lot of connotations, and it can mean a lot of different things. How they preface it, I always look to the word before the rule, because sometimes they get calls from subcontractors saying, well, the rule just passed. Well, not necessarily. If it's a proposed rule, it has a different meaning than a final rule. And there's always, generally speaking, a comment period. So those are the 2 groups. There's many others that we work with, but we work together, and that doesn't mean we can't stand alone. We've been effective in standing alone. Like, for example, when we brought to both groups, specifically the Procurement Coalition, about reverse auctions. And I learned that issue quickly by being in a fly-in. And one of our members, I'll call him out, Robert Abney, former past president with FL Crane, schooled me on the impact of reverse auction. And reverse auction is worse than lowest possible bid. And there was companies coming in that already had figured out what the platform would be or the framework for this construction project, and it was going to be manipulated in other states and other areas. And so what they determined was, if we can control the cost and control the impact of that, we'll use a reverse auction. And contractors, as I'm told, I've never witnessed it, they come in, they have a number, and they bid down rather than bid up. So that's why they call it a reverse auction. And they take it down to the lowest level. And we brought that very specifically to the Procurement Coalition. We fought very hard, and that passed. That did pass Congress. No projects, no federal project, 250,000. Now, we had it at 0. I'm going to be clear. We had it at 0. No federal projects could use reverse auctions. But in my line of work, there's a lot of copycatting. They use the word plagiarism, but you know, you learn from precedent, right?
Right.
So I don't see that as pejorative. They just saw that we had a good bill. And so they came back and I'll be very specific. Representative Comer from Kentucky thought that he could raise that threshold, which he did. And he was able to get to pass, to the chagrin of Senator Portman, who was our ally from Ohio on that. He's retired now. But they did raise the threshold. So now I have to say no reverse auction for 250,000 or more can be used in that bidding process. It was a big win for us. It was learned by our subs. They were being impacted by it. And we were able to get it passed and made into law.
So you've mentioned a couple of legislators here. Now, they're not all construction guys, right?
No.
So I know we've got advocates there. You've cultivated these relationships over the years, clearly, so that we do have people in Congress who are willing to help us. How do you communicate these issues? What strategies do you use to make sure that they understand construction industry and how it affects subcontractors and some of the legislation they're putting out there?
Well, let's take, for example, in the 2017 jobs and tax cuts legislation. That legislation is going to sunset because, you know, there's a lot of tax cuts in there and you have to pay for that. And so there was an eight-year horizon. It's going to be up in 2025, and it's going to have a big impact for our members, because I know our members aren't tax guys. They have accountants for that, but it's going to deal with succession planning, estate planning, death tax, etc. Okay. Well, back then, when 2017, when this bill was matriculating itself through the Congress, the question came up about 529 college savings plans. And we know that there's been a major change in our thinking that not every one of our children or students want to go on to college after high school.
Right.
So we worked very specifically with Congressman Don Norcross, and ASA has been very supportive of his efforts. Representative Norcross is a member of IBW 98 out of Philadelphia, but he represents Camden, New Jersey. He took on this initiative because he was on the relevant committee for jurisdiction, number one. Number two is he was going through the apprenticeship program, and he realized that not everyone wants to go on to college. And so if we could take that 529 and apply it to apprenticeship programs, that way, if your parents or grandparents set up a 529 and you get to the point where your niece or nephew or grandson or granddaughter doesn't want to go on to college, they can use that money for an apprenticeship program. And somebody who's gone through it, who can speak to it like he can, was extremely effective. Number two is, while he was going through the apprenticeship program, the issue of daycare came up. And daycare is covered in that now for apprentices, because you think about it, for our guys going out to a job site, you're up at 4:35, you're on the job at 6. Very hard if you don't have, you know, your parents or grandparents to, you know, take your, or great grandparents to watch over your children. What babysitter is going to come at, you know, 6 o'clock in the morning? So you have coverage for now, the cost of that. And that applies to, you know, to registered apprenticeship programs, and it applies for, for career technical schools as well. So it's a very effective way, and we worked very closely with him on that. Senator Hirona, I know Scott Holbrook on our Attorneys Council may not always agree with her positions because she is on the Judiciary Committee. And I get that. He's from California, she's from Hawaii. And we're actually going to be working on a chapter in Hawaii for ASA. Why? Because majority of the work in Hawaii is federal contracting work. And she gets that. So even though she may not be able to speak to all these issues, but when we talk about payment performance bonds, or we talk about prompt payment, she's always been our advocate, because she understands a lot of federal contracting work and federal construction work is being done in Hawaii, just because it's a very important state to us for a variety of reasons, primarily for national security beyond being a beautiful tourism state. So she's a big advocate. However, I will say, over and beyond, our greatest advocate, and it's hard to compare, and she's a Democrat, there are two Democrats, but let's talk about Congressman Stolberg and Congressman Fitzpatrick, both Republicans, Stolberg from Minnesota, Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania. Fitzpatrick comes from, an attorney by trade and a CPA by trade prior to coming to Congress, but grew up in Lower Bucks, which is, right outside of Philadelphia, in a town that was mimicked from New York, in Levittown. He grew up with a lot of construction, and he understood what it meant when you weren't paid on time. He saw a lot of people get impacted by that. So in 2017, even prior to me coming on with ASA, he worked on legislation for prompt payment. And one of the other guys that really, and he was on the relevant committee at the time, but then he transferred off the committee. And the other guy that picked it up, he passed the baton to, although Fitzpatrick's still a co-sponsor, but his counter co-sponsor on the Republican side is Stolber, Pete Stolber from Minnesota. And he's addressed our group at our congressional reception. He's also addressed our group in person in his office this year, but he's been a tremendous advocate because he owned a small business and he understands the whole impact of a change order. And I'm speaking to the choir on change orders. You all know what a change order is. I don't need to define that, but what you may not know is in a federal contract with a change order, everything else can be paid out but a change order. And what Fitzpatrick started to do and what Stolbert's doing right now in the Small Business Committee is to say, if you have a change order and you need to get paid, we want to allow an interim partial payment. Give me at least 50% of payment for that change order rather than me wait until that project's finished. And think about that. If you're the first guy on the job, say you're the electrician or the mechanical guy, and now you've moved on to 3 other jobs, but you may have a project that still hasn't been paid out. We were able to see that in real time, if I may, just to extend it one more minute on this. Andrew Christ, who's a member of our board, he's also with the Kansas ASA. He testified in front of the Small Business Committee because he has a change order in front of the Air Force right now. And it started out back in February 6th to be about $250,000. Wow. Yes, and we just met right prior to that. That committee then led to the Small Business Administrator coming out to visit his facilities literally a month later in Kansas. And then that led to a discussion just right before 4th of July with the Air Force, which is where he has the change order issue. Right. And in that meeting, that's up to close to $800,000 that still hasn't been paid out. And wow. Imagine carrying that. I mean, we're subcontractors. We're not banks. We can't carry that debt. And Stolberg gets that. I mean, Stolberg gets it, and he thinks it's unconscionable. And so he's using his position within the committee to address it, not only by having the hearing, but helping us. He's also has his counterpart in the Senate, the ranking member of the Small Business Committee, Senator Ernst from Iowa. She's the one who arranged the meeting with the Air Force. So I give you these analogies because these members are all over. We got Hawaii, we got Minnesota, we got Iowa, we got Pennsylvania, we got Jersey, we got Democrats, Republicans. So, but you gotta, let me end with this. You gotta love what you do. And I know that sounds almost like a Hallmark card or some sort of saying, but you gotta study it. And you gotta see where, everything, where the planets align, or simply how to connect the dots. And that's what I try to do for our members.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, there's a few more questions. Do you have time to run through a few more things here? Okay.
Absolutely.
Because I'm thinking about all these congressmen and senators that you're mentioning. Obviously, there's turnover, right? So we're going to lose advocates here and there. It helps to diversify your contacts, obviously, because as you lose somebody, you can add more in. How do you identify these folks who you feel like might be advocates for you, or do they come to you, once you put the word into ether that these are important issues to ASA?
Well, I'll take the latter first. Congressman Veazey from Texas, he actually had a forum for small businesses. They were minority-owned businesses, and they had a change order issue. And so what he did was, and I actually thought it was a prank. I thought it was a joke. He called our ASA number, and he said, "Well, I saw ASA. You were at the top of the the phone book list." And he said, "I gave a call," and he said, "This is Congressman Veazey." And at first, I thought, "You got to be kidding me!" But as I talked to him, no, it was really Congressman Veazey, and he had a real issue that he had to address. And so we were able to take Brian Carroll from our Austin chapter, former past president, and a couple others from that area. He's in that Fort Worth, Dallas area. We had some members
Okay.
join him, and he had a meeting there that we were able to send and kind of explain to him how it works, change orders, how it impacts small minority-owned businesses. He's on the committee. He's now a co-sponsor. He's a Democrat, co-sponsors with Stolber and Fitzpatrick, two Republicans. So he came by it, what I'd like to term, I guess, the old-fashioned way. I look at it as most, if I know, for example, I know Stolber, Fitzpatrick, based upon where their districts are, I feel, they're pretty confident that they'll get reelected. But even if you say they are reelected, are they going to stay on the committee? You never know. They might want to go to another committee because they never tell you. They might be vying for something else. Who knows? But I don't have to work with the members. That's really where I want to go. I like the staff. I like the staff. Out of those 44 meetings, we met with 5 members of Congress. And most people would say, well, I don't want to work with a guy like Mike Oscar because he doesn't, get us in front of members of Congress. No, that's not true. I want to get you in front of the staff. The staff, having been a former staffer, worked on the Hill for 10 years. My wife worked on the Hill for 8 years. Kate, who's now with us, worked 15 years. We know where the bodies are buried. And making those relationships, working with staffers that have worked our way, like, for example, the Senator Ernst meeting, the ranking member I mentioned about getting the meeting with the Air Force, Vivian Lang is phenomenal. Vivian started out on the House Armed Services Committee, then she went over to the Small Business Committee, and now she's at the Small Business Committee in the Senate. And all that time, she's got to know who we are, what we're about. She believes in our mission. She's very dedicated to it. Same thing with Ryan Lambert, who's the professional counsel for the House Small Business Committee chair, Williams. And Williams, believe it or not, never even served on the Small Business Committee, and now he became chair because that was a deal he cut with the former Speaker McCarthy, but he owns car dealerships and has a lot of them. I was just down in Dallas with Bev's, the North Dallas chapter, I believe it's called,
Right.
with Bev and her husband John and quite a few others down there. They know of his car dealerships. Bottom line is he has a voice. He has a voice now on the committee. It's one of the reasons why we had the hearing. So I would say to you that getting to know the staff, understanding, yes, there's going to be a flush. We call it the congressional flush. Right after the lame duck session, we'll come into the new year. I'll be up when they get sworn in. But, I'm going to meet the new team, and there's going to be a lot of new team members. You always hate to, like, this fly-in was an easy one because we had a lot of repeats because, most of the staff stayed on from the first year. Usually they stay the 2 years at Congress. So the next fly-in is going to be tougher because we'll have a lot of newer offices to work with. So I'll have a lot of work to do between, January and June of next year. Meeting with the new staff, meeting with older staff, and then you get a reputation. I believe my reputation is, generally speaking, people are like, they may not like me initially, but then over time they realize I'm not a bad guy and I'm giving them good information. And the reason they don't like me is because I've been doing this for some time now, and I know I'm a young guy, but I can smell, I can hear the snake oil or see it, smell the, I know where they're going. Don't go into partisanship. That's the other thing too. When I worked, clearly, this is a very generational shift, major generational shift. When I worked in the late 90s and early 2000s and so forth in Congress, we never mentioned politics. Never. Republican, Democrat. Never came up in meetings. You're breaking the Hatch Act. You're in a federal building. That's a criminal offense. Now staffers, there's just not an appreciation. Not all of them, but some of them. And you got to be very careful because, none of my guys or gals that come in, we do not talk politics in those offices. Because at the end of the day, those offices are representative of America. And they're owned by the constituents, and we shouldn't be having political discussions. If you want to go out to the local pub, or if you want to go to the Democratic headquarters, Republican headquarters, campaign headquarters, talk, absolutely. But in those buildings, we don't talk politics. We just talk about the issue at hand. And that's why it's good, again, to have a non-ideological basis for our issues.
Let's shift gears just a little bit.
Sure.
So in terms of challenges that you face as an advocate for subcontractors, What are some of the biggest challenges that you face and how do you overcome them?
The biggest challenge is just getting our message out to our own membership, making sure they're aware of it. And I overcome it by visiting a lot of the chapters. I make it a practice to do that. I told the leadership when I came on board, if they're willing to have me, I'd like to go. Not because I'm not trying to be cute, to add to my frequent flyer bios. It's just because while I'm on the ground, I develop that rapport and I'm building a team. I used to coach the debate team when I was a high school teacher. And I have to know, who's for me, who's against me. I have to know, how to do that. I also coached track, field track, and I know I need to know who my 500-meter sprinters are and who's my marathon runners. I need to know. So going to the individual chapters, meeting with the members, learning from them helps me drive the agenda. I'll be coming up and visiting with the in Wilmington, North Carolina, in a couple of weeks for the ASA North Carolinas convention, which I've gone to before. I just came from a Dallas trip with Houston and Dallas, Texas, the two Texas chapters. But my point is getting to know the membership, getting to understand what their needs are, developing a rapport, and then taking that back to Congress. My challenge is a constant challenge with staff because you have 15 minutes. It's like speed dating. If you can't make your point, so they're either buying or they're selling you. They're just not, they're in or they're out. And sometimes that takes time for them to be convinced. Even if you have the best case in front of them, it takes time for them to get back to you with an answer. So that's a constant challenge. Knowing when to push them and when not to pull, knowing when to intervene and not to intervene. Also, none of our agenda, and I'll end with this, on the Government Relations Committee is we're not setting our members up for failure. I'm not about to set up a legislative campaign on an issue that I know is never going to come to fruition. In my humble opinion, that's just a lot of noise. And you've propped up somebody or someone with the expectation when you know the outcome is not going to be favorable. So what's the point of wasting our time? Our legislative issues, and this has been agreed to by both of our co-chairs, are very specific to our industry, and they're a lot of work. So the challenge is constantly educating the staff to stay on top of it. And I know they're busy, and I know I'm coming in at 9 miles an hour with a lot of heat and passion for these issues, but I just got to moderate that and balance it so that we can be effective. So, but it is, and we're working through it. We're working through it. We made a lot of strong relationships, and we'll continue to do that.
So a couple more things. You mentioned that you're unable to lobby nationally because you're only licensed to do so in PA and DC.
Well, no, I can lobby nationally, but I can't lobby state issues beyond Pennsylvania. Yeah. So gotcha. I couldn't lobby, say, in Iowa or New Jersey or whatever,
but you can
at the federal
advise.
level, but not at the state level. Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. That's a great distinction. Thanks for the correction.
No problem.
So what is the difference between what you do nationally on the Hill versus what the chapters are doing in the states? And where are those efforts, because I know you were advising some of the chapters in certain regards, where do those two efforts kind of intersect or cooperate? And how, and so just another part of this, how can we better connect those dots so we can pull all the chapters and all the people out there who are interested in this together to have a bigger voice as ASA?
Right. Well, first off, it gets back to the chapter. Is the chapter engaged on government relations issues? So sometimes my visits out to these chapters just whettens their appetite. Like I did that in Utah. I did that, not in Utah, excuse me, in Idaho. Where we're starting a new chapter there to kind of understand. It's been a couple of years since I've been there, and that chapter's doing very well from what I hear. But it depends on, do they even know that this goes on, at the national level, and do they want to do something similarly at the state level? In addition to that, for example, in Washington State, the driver for that chapter and the reason for that chapter was government relations, because it was a 5%, they wanted to reduce retainage to 5%, and we worked collectively to do that. And they didn't have a lobbyist, but we were able to help them because the Colorado chapter, which is more established, not only had a lobbyist, but had just gone through it. So we had precedent in order for that to move forward. So it really depends. In Pennsylvania, we have 2 chapters. They do not have a lobbyist. I do help them with a lot of their issues. You know, I would say that they're engaged at the level they want to be at. But there's other chapters that I would say that the chapters that have a lobbyist already are easier to work with because they understand the process. They have a government relations agenda in front of them and they want to do it. But for example, in Louisiana just recently, nowhere, I've never seen this before, but in the state, there's a contracting, what do they call it? Licensure board, construction licensure board. And in that legislation, you know, the ABC, the AGC, and the ASA has a number of seats that are to that construction contractor licensing board. I never saw this specifically. Usually, you know, they'll give like a broad definition, but they don't singularly identify. And one of our seats was in jeopardy. So Angie gave me a call, and all through the Easter break, I was advising her. And at some point, and we just started, the board just agreed to do this, was a great example of this, but we're going to start a state advocacy fund. So in situations like this, yeah, situations like this where they did not anticipate they were going to potentially lose this seat, okay? They didn't have a government relations person. They didn't have a lobbyist. You know, they had an attorney advising them, but the attorney advising him wasn't necessarily in the government space. He was more of a contractual lawyer, at least from what I'm told. I never met him, so I can't answer that. But that's what I was told. So when the rubber hit the road and they needed to be present at a committee hearing and they needed to have boots on the ground, somebody that already had the relationships perhaps that I have at the national level, they were able to get some funds from the national chapter to help them achieve that victory and keep that seat, which was very important because if we lost that seat, can you imagine, like, well, why am I a member of this chapter if they can't even save the seat, right? So, but, you know, so it depends on the chapter. It depends on what the focus of the chapter is. If you want, you know, if they don't want to necessarily get involved, but maybe they just want to be informed, like in Florida. Our Southwest Florida chapter, they have a government relations, you know, interest, but they want to be monitored. They want to know what's happening there, but they may not want to be out in front on a piece of legislation. But whether you have a lobbyist or not, we also have what we call voter voice. And that is a advocacy tool where we can get information out. You know, whether we're for or opposed to piece of legislation, we draft it up. I do ask for some background from that individual chapter on the issue, and then we do our own research on it, led by myself, Kate, and Shannon, and we put together an action alert that goes out to the members, and then we track it as the piece of legislation, say that we're for it or against it, as it's moving through committee, as it moves through the House and the Senate, and, you know, comes to the floor. We send this link out to the ED, and the executive director then sends it out to their members, and they just get the alert and they just fill in your address and phone number and send it. And then that member at the state level then gets heard by the contractors, or, you know, from the subcontractors from his or her state or district. So that's been very effective through the years. So, you know, I think it's really just, you know, one chapter at a time. You know, a lot of what happens at the national level is as precedent for the state and local level. But I can see, for example, with mechanics lien specifically, and with prompt pay, and with retainage, how we were able to take what we learned. Like they just passed Trey as our new Attorney's Council chair from Mississippi, but now he's based in Atlanta, and he used the work that we did around the country to help in Mississippi to finally reduce retainage by 5%. That's a big deal for that state, and it took a lot of work to do that. But Trey was able to get it done, and again, with his chapter, we have a very robust chapter in Mississippi, working together with their legislators, because, you know, everybody kind of knows each other. Whenever I bring that delegation up to Senator Wicker's office, I find out how they're in the choir with the senator, how they fly the senator, and they all know each other from the streets. It's a very small, and I love that. Now, I say small in a positive way. I'm not criticizing it, but everybody from Tupelo knows everybody, and but they were very effective and they got it done. And Trey led the charge for them with Lloyd, and it was very successful. So again, it depends on the appetite. Colorado,
Yeah.
same way. They have great resources. They have a lobbyist, and there's many others like that. Oh, and in Texas, they have like a Texas-wide construction coalition that even though we have 5 chapters in ASA, those 5 chapters, as I understand it, pay into that association that represents multiple interests of contractors, and they're the voice and advocacy for their members. So that's where we're at.
Yeah, so clearly, I mean, it's awesome to hear that the state issues are kind of also at the same time helping to push a national agenda. So that's why it's
Yes.
so crucial as far as getting involved locally. Chapters is important, but then as well at the national level, we've since I came on board with ASA, I've been educated that the most important thing that we do, especially nationally, for our members is advocacy. And so I will. We're close to ending here. I want to kind of wrap it up with how can members get involved with local advocacy efforts, and you probably touched on a little bit of this already, but also how can they get involved with the national advocacy efforts, and then why is their involvement so important? And I know you've kind of hit that in the course of our discussion here. Can you wrap it up into a nice package that really explains it to the members?
The best example of this is Andrew Christ, who is a young man who just became a partner in ownership of his company from Kansas within the last couple of years since 2020. Got the opportunity to testify in front of the Small Business Committee. I worked with him and prepping him because you have 5 minutes and they have a green, it's a stoplight, red, yellow, and green. And if you hit red I don't know if he believed me, but when the chair said at 5 minutes, I cut you off, I cut the mic off, kind of like what we saw in the presidential debate just a few weeks ago, they cut it off, you're done. So we spent hours prepping him, but he did so well. He was right out of central casting. He looked like a senator, acted like a member of Congress, but he's living, breathing this every day. And that's really important for us as subcontractors because we need to see members and staff need to see young members coming in. No disrespect to our older members, but if they see young members coming into the industry, then they see growth, they see an energy, they see an enthusiasm. So we have to pay attention to that because there's this small economic engine. Whether you're for or against construction, that company is the economic engine that's providing salaries, a lifestyle, et cetera, and they are constituents. And if that business goes out of business in that area or a congressional district, then they're going to have to figure out a way to make up for it or resolve it, right, or replace it. So but I think it's very important for members, whether you're at the federal level, state level, or local level, if you have the chance to go up to your individual state capitals or come into Washington. I know coming into Washington is expensive. I get that. Trust me, I do. And I try to keep all of your costs minimal, and I try to keep your time here as tight as possible, but effective. You usually get about 7 or 8 meetings when you come to our congressional meetings. And if you ask your counterparts in ABC and AGC, you do not get that many meetings, and I know that to be true. But my point is, if you have a chance to go up and talk to your legislators, do it, because it's very important for them to hear from you. That's number one. Number two is to take advantage of what you're paying into. You're a member of ASA. We have a lot of resources. Go to our social media, go to our website, read ASA Today. I took a long haul while I was in the Carolinas convention a couple of years ago from Columbia back to Charleston. Well, first we went Charleston to Columbia, which is across state, and then Columbia back to Charleston. On my way back, my driver, one of the contractors from there, former past president of ASA Carolinas convention, said to me, he's like, listen, kid, I respect what you do. I appreciate the ASA Today's, but I'm not going to read it. I don't have time. I'm reading every other thing. I got so many other things to do. But if you put it in a podcast, well, look what we're doing right now, I may listen to it. I can listen to it while I'm driving to the work site, or I'm listening to it when I'm going to the supply house, or I'm working, listening to it on my way home. I can get a lot of valuable information. So we've done a lot of podcasts. We do the voter voice. So you don't even have to leave your office or leave the job site. You can enter in your address and there it goes off to your legislator. You can also listen to our webinars, or you can get engaged in the committee, or you can look. Last year, I got this question recently. Well, what's the benefit for me of ASA? And this was from a chapter in Texas. We have 5 chapters in Texas. And I said to them, we had 5 cases last year in a legal defense fund. 2 of the 5 went to the Supreme Court in Texas, and they were friend of the court cases, amicus briefs, that were all in efforts to support subcontractors' needs. Now, I won't get into the merits of the cases because that's not relevant now, but what I can say is how many cases, specifically 2 of the 5 went to Supreme Courts in Texas, let alone the others that one went to the Illinois Supreme Court. So appellate courts, I mean, that's a big deal. That's a big influence. And if you're not aware of that, well, let us know and we'll make you aware of it. We'll give you the information and we have documents that give you all 50 states, updated copies, all 50 states for change laws, mechanics liens laws, prompt pay laws that are updated by, a set of human beings that have a great interest, legal counsels that have tremendous construction law experience that are advising us and putting this together that is at your fingertips. And that's a tremendous resource. So that's how I would say to get engaged, and just raise your hand, get involved, and we'll guide you accordingly. It's a great opportunity for all of us.
I think the important thing is, we don't know what we don't know, right? And it's important for our members to come out and say, hey, Mike, hey, Richard, hey, whoever, here's what's going on. Can you help? And once that switch is flipped, well, then we know, and then we can try to do something about it. So I like your message. I think it's important for people to step up, shoot us an email, pick up the phone and call us. You can message us on social media, whatever you do, let's make that connection. And we have, you and Shannon and Kate and Richard and Matt and anybody who's willing to make that trip and have those discussions.
That is right. Yep, we work hand in glove, and we're a good team, and we try our best. And sometimes we don't get it always right, but we do try, and we do sometimes succeed. And I think that's important. So thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you for your time today. I know this is a lot of information. I think it's a lot of good information. Is there anything else that you would want to leave with our listeners that maybe you feel like you haven't covered or that I didn't ask about?
Nope. I would just say, thank you for all the work you do. We take it seriously. You're the economic engine. People don't realize, and I'll end with this, that, subcontractors make up 3/4 of the construction industry. And, ASA realizes that, and we make it a priority. So thank you very much.
Awesome.